Hello everybody and welcome to sunny Switzerland. I'm standing in front of a Bf-108 Taifun and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the history of this aircraft and what makes it so important. Now, arguably speaking, the Bf-108 is perhaps one of the most important aircraft to come out of the mid-1930s. It is influential in so many ways you wouldn't even believe, and its history is also closely intertwined with the German Luftwaffe. Now, in 1933, the Bayerische Luftzeugwerke are a company that is struggling big time. The Great Depression had hit, and obviously during that time, nobody is really putting out money for civilian aircraft. However, in 1933, the Reichsluftfahrtministerium gave them an order for an all-purpose carrier, and this would eventually then lead into the Bf-108. Now, but the Bayerische Luftzeugwerke, we had a chap called Willy Messerschmitt. He had earlier, in the mid-1920s, fused his company with the Bayerische Luftzeugwerke. When this order came in by the RLM, the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, Willy Messerschmitt had a choice. He had, of course, to design an aircraft that was an all-purpose carrier and that was able to be used for many ways, but he also knew that there were going to be contracts coming up in time for fighter aircraft. But because the company had been struggling so much, the resources were very limited. So a lot of the stuff that went into the Bf-108 was in fact also designed to go then into the Bf-109. And in fact, during the whole development of this aircraft, Willy Messerschmitt and his engineers kept in mind the fact that they have to produce that fighter somewhere down the line. So this thing really was a sort of a prototype for that. Now in 1934, the first prototype comes out. This is the BFW M37. Now the M in that stands for Messerschmitt and the BFW obviously for Bayerische Luftzeugwerke. This really is the prototype of this aircraft, and it is already quite a significant improvement over similar aircraft of the time. It is an all-metal construction, has room for 4 passengers, and the way it is built, we'll go into that in just a second as well, is quite revolutionary. Now, the 108 was supposed to be fast, light, and minimalist. Now, I want to stress one point. Minimalist, in the 108 sense, does not mean simple. In fact, there's quite a few complicated systems in the aircraft, but they are all been refined to make them convenient and easy to use. And this is why this aircraft has such a high reputation with pilots actually flew it, because it's such a joy to fly and to operate. Now, the fast nature of this aircraft obviously should be put into context of the time, but it really was a light aircraft, and this gave it already an advantage in the power-to-weight ratio, but we'll go into that a little bit later on as well. Now the construction, all metal of course, a modular build, something that wasn't really done at the time. This was really a step into a new era of modern air aviation. And the 108 in this sense really marks that stepping stone. Now this lightweight construction means a couple of things. First of all, the aircraft on paper, empty, only weighs 850 kilograms. However, on top of that, it could in fact carry 550 kilograms. This is for fuel obviously, but also for cargo and passengers. This means that the aircraft can carry more than half of its own weight once it's fully loaded. So let's have a look at the engine then. When the Bf-108A came out, it had a HERV 8U engine, producing roughly 225 horsepower at maximum power. The B version that we have right here is in fact powered by an Argus 10C. This already wraps up the power to roughly 260 kilometers an hour at maximum and roughly 240 at continuous. With the C model that came later on, we in fact have a Siemens engine, but there weren't a lot of those models produced. Now with the engine here, we can get this bird up to roughly 300 kilometers an hour at maximum power, but it's more or less 260 at continuous. This makes the aircraft quite fast. Again, you have to remember that this is the context of the 1930s, where high-performance, fast aircraft, the way we think of them, didn't exist just yet. And this aircraft, in fact, was quite nifty for the time. In fact, when the aircraft came out in 1934 with the A model, it already produced the first couple of records. In the Challenge 1934 competition in Poland, the Bf-108A won first prize in top speed, second prize in top speed, and third prize in top speed. And this really gave the legacy of the Taifun as a fast aircraft. However, there are a couple of stories that come into play when we think of the name Taifun. This was not in fact a sales pitch initially and came only later on. And in fact, it is credited to Ili Bakon. She was a pilot that flew the BF-108. And she said because of the speed and because of the power that was in this aircraft, especially after she had flown from Gliwice, which is in nowadays Poland, over to Istanbul and back to Berlin on a record-breaking flight, which took roughly 13 hours and 30 minutes. After that flight, she said that because the aircraft was so fast, and in fact she flew an average of 257 kilometers an hour, that it really was a Taifun in reference to the speed. And this is the name obviously that stuck, Willy Messerschmitt obviously being a very clever salesman, and he used it to full effect. Now before I show you some other things, I want to have a few words about the engine. Now, as I said initially in the introduction, the 108 is a refined aircraft, kept minimalist and simple. When it comes to maintenance of the aircraft and the engine, there is a certain element of that here as well, because you can open this part up quite easily and you can access the engine. However, the people that actually maintain this aircraft, in the conversation I had with them, told me that the actual maintenance of the engine, even you can get to the engine itself relatively easy, but the maintenance of the engine is somewhat difficult. Especially getting to the spark plugs is somewhat difficult. In fact, they had to produce a custom-built tool to get to a few of them. So the maintenance of the engine itself, even though you can access the engine relatively easy, which is something that not a lot of planes actually had during the time, was somewhat tricky. Now, talking about some of the things that are not as convenient as you might think in the 108, refueling this aircraft is essentially one of them, and is probably the most annoying part of everything when it comes to the actual use of the aircraft. You have a single refueling hole here that you can use. The problem is the aircraft has 5 tanks. So every time you fill it up, you have to wait for the tank to fill. Then you stop refueling, and then you listen. And there's a sort of trickle-down effect from the first tank that you filled into the other tanks. So you have to listen, you have to hear, essentially you're waiting for gluk, 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 and suddenly the first tank that you filled is empty, and then you can start refueling again. And you keep on doing that until all 5 tanks are completely full. One very interesting aspect of the 108 is of course the usage of slats in the design. The slats are on the outer part of the wings and they open automatically at low speeds, just like so. And once the aircraft has regained a little bit of speed, they fold back inwards. This is all automatically, the pilot doesn't have to do anything. And this allows him to have a little bit more control at low speeds. Now, the nice thing about these slats on the 108 is that essentially they're a trial run for what we will later on see in the Bf-109, which becomes a mainstream fighter in the Luftwaffe. And they also incorporated this exact slat design in their wings. All in all, 885 aircraft are built, and the production in fact starts in Augsburg. 175 are built there in the Messerschmitt factory, or before it shifts over to Regensburg, still in Germany, with 575 airplanes built there. Now after that, and it's now 1942, something very interesting happens, and in fact the production of these aircraft is moved to France. In fact, in the factories there, the production continues until 1944, when the factory is taken over by the Allies. After that, the designation of the aircraft changes, a new engine has been put in, but the production continues as it goes along. And in fact, the aircraft changes its name to Nord 1000 Pingouin. And in that configuration, there's a couple of variants and models that come out, and in fact give this aircraft a life beyond World War II. Indeed, by the Swiss Air Force. In fact, this aircraft that we have right here was used in the Swiss Air Force. The Taifun would continue to operate as a trainer aircraft until 1959. And the French Air Force used this aircraft all the way up to 1962. So this is quite a long lifespan for an aircraft on this, of this kind, especially considering that it was on the losing side. Okay, so to get into the Taifun, very simple. You have a handle up here, step up. You twist the door handle and you move it all the way up to the front where it gets to rest on a little chuck. And there we go. Very easy to get in now. Very convenient as well for the passengers that you might have. We obviously have 2 pilot seats here and 2 passenger seats, and we'll get a look of that right now. So let's get in. All right, getting into the 108. Not that simple, in fact. Very convenient for the passengers, not so much for the pilot. I'm going to try my best not to step on the seats, even though that is perfectly allowed by the pilot himself. And once we're inside, here we are in the pilot's position. Now, first thing I gotta say is extremely comfortable aircraft to actually sit in. As you can see, the seat is sort of inclined to the back, and one of the lads over here, when he introduced this aircraft to me, he said it feels like sitting in a Porsche, and it's in fact true. It's very comfortable, and you know, you understand why it is in fact a passenger seat. Over there you can obviously see the passengers in action. Now we have a few convenience things here for the pilot himself. We obviously have a small window which you can open, which I'm not going to be doing right now, and we have also a little bit of a curtain which you can use against the sun, which is very convenient today since it's a lot of sun out there. An emergency jettison of the canopy, very important obviously in times of dire need. And then let's talk a little bit about the controls of the actual aircraft. Of course, you can see down there where my feet are, you have the rudder pedals. Very nice to sit in. And okay, starting to my immediate left, we have the trim tab, which is this wheel right here, with an indicator here to allow you to set it to the desired setting. The trim tab really allows you just to have a more convenient flight, where you can set your elevator to a setting that allows the plane to go straight in a line instead of, you know, up and down or something like that, and at which point you would have to regulate it with your flight stick. And this really is a convenience kind of thing, and a lot of planes really of the era, and starting in the mid-1930s, and even there's some of them during the First World War already had this, but it really becomes standardized in the kind of the mid-1930s. And the bigger wheel that we have right here is the flaps, with an indicator right here for your flap setting, 0, -10, -20, -30, -40. One thing I will have to say about the actual dashboard that we have right here is that some of these things are not exactly original. As you can see, the radio has been modernized. This obviously allows the aircraft to be used right now, otherwise this wouldn't be possible. But overall here you can see a kind of a strange mixture between French and German. This is of course because this aircraft was used by the Swiss military after being bought in the 1930s. And in fact, this aircraft was used to train Swiss 108 and 109 pilots. So that is actually quite a little part of history. Now, moving on here, we obviously have the pilot's control stick, and then to his top we have the speedometer, we have the bank and turn indicator, we have a compass, we have his altitude. This is all in feet. You have the engine RPMs, you have a clock obviously above that, actually quite big. You have the once again for the fuel tanks, so you have the tank in front and you have the tank in the back, and then you have the ATA, that's the manifold pressure of the engine. Over here we have the fuel indicator, how much fuel you have left, and this would in fact be the original one. I guess this is the more modernized version of it. And over here we have the oil and fuel pressure, which is very important to keep an eye on, and also the temperature of the oil. Over here we have a fire extinguisher pole, which is inoperable at the moment, as you can see. We also have the pump for the fuel tanks, which is inoperable at the moment. But overall, this kind of gives you an idea of the simplicity of the aircraft and how it is in fact set up for the pilot. He also has a few cheat sets here. He gives him, for example, how fast he can be with fully deployed landing flaps, and what his cruising speed should be, what his maximum speed should be, and obviously what his range is, and so forth. All in all, it's a very simple aircraft, and if you've sat in aircrafts before and you can kind of see how it is set up and how everything is nice in view, you can kind of get an appreciation for the simplicity of this aircraft and how easy it is in fact to operate. In fact, over here the magnetos, I actually forgot to mention these. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you guys is in fact this handle right here. This is the gear. The 108 has a deployable landing gear, which was at the time a novelty. In fact, it was so much of a novelty that they had to build a safety feature in order to prevent the pilot from landing without his gear deployed. Now over here we have Flug- und Landestellung. Flug means essentially flight, and Lande means landing, or well, standing, I guess, in the setting that we have it right now. Which allows the pilot to realize at what stage he is right now. In order to get it from Lande to Flug, you'd have to pump this handle around 50 times, and in order to get it to Flug to Lande, you have to do the same thing. This is somewhat of a laborious task, but during the time it was, as I said, a novel feature, and it actually contributed a lot also to the speed of the aircraft in a very organic manner. The safety feature that they implemented was an acoustic warning sound that would strike an alarm whenever the plane dipped below a certain speed. And at that point, of course, the aircraft thought that it was in a kind of a landing approach setting. And it would warn the pilot that he is still in flight setting and not in a landing setting. And this is obviously something that is quite helpful, especially to new pilots. And since this aircraft was used as a trainer during the war, it is something that is sorely needed. Now, I hope that you guys enjoyed our look at the Bf-108. Remember to like this video and to share it with your friends. And if you want to allow me to be able to make more of these kind of videos and in fact bring them into your living room, check out my Patreon down below. In fact, this is my patrons that allowed me to essentially get my flight ticket over here to Switzerland and to get the equipment that I needed in order to film this episode. So if you enjoy what I do, please check it out. Also, I want to thank the organization that actually owns this aircraft, AMPA. I will have their link to their website in the description below. Check that out as well. They have some lovely aircraft as well. I also want to make a special shout out to Elliot for in fact inviting me to come over here. As always, I hope you guys have a great day, good hunting, and see you in the sky.